needs to really be concerned with ethics. And ethics is the matters of what's right and wrong within research. It puts parameters on morality, and it helps researchers not step over the line in between things that might be immoral for the sake of science. And researchers will have a shared meaning of, or good research anyway, will have shared meaning of ethics. The ethics are put out there for other people to critique, and a lot of times when people have studies that are unethical, they're not going to find journals to be published in and things like that. So there needs to be a balance, or not a balance, but the pros of the research need to outweigh the cons of the potential harm to the participants, and that's what they are, participants in the study. We need to look at possible re-traumatization of the questions we ask. So we might not want to ask questions about childhood sexual abuse because it may be re-traumatizing to the participants. Or if we do that study, we need to really make sure that they're fully aware of the potential harm of that study. And also violence to the researcher. You know, if we're doing research within criminal justice, that might put the researcher into harm's way, and we want to make sure that that we don't allow that if at all possible. Criminal justice research is very personal. It oftentimes will ask very intimate questions that can be seen as intruding into a person's life. And participation in these studies need to be voluntary as much as possible. You know, for example, like Uniform Crime Report data that's generated by the various departments in the U.S., you know, you don't need to go back and ask every person that commits a crime if they are okay with you looking at the data from the Uniform Crime Report. No, but data where we're asking people intimate questions certainly needs to be on a voluntary basis. One of the downsides is when we do that, it threatens the generalizability of a study because some people may withhold information, such as if you go into a prison and you're asking, have you ever did drugs while you've been in prison, some people, even though that's going to be confidential and they're told it's going to be confidential, even though that they may have used drugs in the prison, are going to say they haven't because they think it's possible that they're being set up. Research is best when it is anonymous, when we can't identify the subjects of the study, because people are going to be more likely to be truthful if they feel like their confidentiality is being respected. For example, when I did a study a while back, I informed them of the possible breaches to confidentiality that could possibly occur. But I had let them know that I'm not keeping their name with any of the data. The data, or their names, I'm sorry, were coded with the data so I could go back and find out who was who. And I kept their personal information under lock and key, and actually only one other person knew where that information was in case something happened to me, that person could come in and grab the research. And then after 7 years, all personal information and all information related to the study was actually destroyed, which was all part of the plan of the study. So it's really good to replace names and addresses and any specific identifying type of information. Take that out of the research, especially the data that's being passed on to journals and other places where you might publish that research. Going into studies and being undercover incognito, not identifying yourself as a researcher, is very dangerous and almost always considered unethical. If you want to work for the National Enquirer or work the crime reporting for a newspaper, sometimes they might not identify themselves as a reporter. But if you want to be ethical in what you're doing and be, a bona fide criminal justice researcher, you definitely need to follow ethical guidelines and not try to deceive or con people when you're doing a study, trying to collect data. It's almost always best to go into a study as unbiased as possible, but sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes you might be working for a program that, for example, they have this new method of treating chemical dependency in a criminal justice population, and you really feel that it is just an awesome program, and you wish that everybody would be using it. So you decide to go in and do a study. And the study shows that it really wasn't a benefit compared to treatment as usual, and possibly it may have had less benefit than other programs, and you just had thought that it was doing better. But once you actually looked at the data, you're finding out that that research actually, or that the program wasn't working as good. And it's really important that you publish that type of research, because somebody that is in Minnesota might be starting a program and want to replicate a program that's in Florida that you work at, and because of what you saying that this type of program isn't working, the people in Minnesota might go with a different type of treatment method. But had you not said anything, the group of people may have started this program that wasn't as beneficial. It's really important that no matter what the shortcomings of your research are, for example, you might not have done an experimental design when otherwise it would have been beneficial in that situation, but it just wasn't practical, and you may have did a quasi-experimental design instead. And letting people know that maybe that there's fewer subjects in the research than you would like, or there's a higher dropout rate than you would like, making sure that the people reading the research know that, so that they can take your research and build upon it. So that is a really important thing that researchers need to do, is report not just the positives that they find within what they're studying. Just as important is reporting those negatives. Criminal justice research oftentimes can put researchers in a legal quandary, where some people might observe a crime happening, or have some privileged information on some major crime, and they don't report that, or they might be hanging out with felons that are on the run and things like that. And it's real important to know what your legal obligations are, and actually informing the participants before you get involved with possibly observing criminal activity. It's important to know that just because you're subpoenaed to a court hearing doesn't mean that you have to talk within that that court hearing. And a subpoena in and of itself violates confidentiality. But if you show up for a subpoena, and the judge might order you to provide information on some of that criminal activity, and when that happens, I hope you have a good lawyer in your corner that can give you some good legal advice. So what happens if you're doing a study, for example, if you're doing an observation qualitative study with a biker gang that is known to engage in criminal activities, and they don't seem to be doing any criminal activity, but know that because you're there, they might be acting differently, and they're not making drug deals in front of you where they normally might be, but now they decided to do a drug deal in a different location, which happens to be right at a school or something, or near a school. So because you're there, can influence where the crimes take place. what happens if you're doing a study in a prison and you find out about staff misconduct? Staff are being, physically aggressive towards inmates, where that's kind of part of the culture. Well, do you report that, or do you have them, everything remain confidential? Those are things that you really want to think about before you go into the research study. Also, what happens if you're doing a clinical research study or an experimental design, and you have your treatment group that is getting, for example, cognitive behavior treatment for sex offending, and then you have the group that is getting basically supportive counseling, or more of a placebo type of counseling, where they're sitting with a counselor, but there's really not too many methods being used other than just being with the counselor. Is this group more likely to offend? I mean, that's really what we're trying to find out with the study, but is it okay to do an experimental design when we're working with sex offenders, and this treatment group is much more likely to benefit from the treatment, and this group is more likely to offend? What do you do in that circumstance? And then also know about mandatory reporting laws. And researchers, for the most part, are not immune to having to report suspected child abuse. There are a few places researchers can go to get good information on guidelines for ethical conduct within research studies. So a few of the places include the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences and Ethical Standards, the American Society of Criminology and their Code of Ethics, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and there's several, for example, I'm a licensed counselor, and counselors have their own code of ethics that look at research, ethical situations, and psychologists have their own, and like I said, the Academy of Criminal Sciences have their own. Then also lawyers, the American Bar Association has their criminal codes of ethics. Also, something that is very helpful within studies, and for the most part they're within government organizations and universities, are the institutional review boards. The institutional review boards look at your study, and they help you make ethical decisions related to your study. They're going to ask you about things related to the safeguarding of the clients and their confidentiality, and any other type of matter that might affect the participants negatively. And then some institutional review boards, you can hire people that look specifically at your at the ethics within your study. The participants, again, participants means that they're participating in your study. You're not forcing them to be in your study. So participants in your study, or the subjects, oftentimes will sign something called informed consent. And informed consent is, it'll show them what the benefits are of the research, so maybe we know more about drinking and driving, versus the cons about the research, which are, possibly there is some possibility that your confidentiality may be compromised at some point in this research. The possible side effects, well, maybe you'll have some re-traumatization or anxiety because of talking about the accident, or whatever it is. And making sure that participants know that all the possible side effects and risks of the research is really important, and having them sign an informed consent is really important. Something that's also really important to know about informed consent is the person has to be able to make have the cognitive capacity to understand informed consent, and to be able to ask you questions, and to be able to say no if they need to. And some things that might compromise Their capacity includes